the first independent action that we achieve is to, as we shoot out of our mother's birth canals, this is obviously if we're abled beings, is to breathe in, and then we roar the stroke of life. We also know this because we talk about the Big Bang, not the Big Silence, which is 13.7 billion years ago, which is supposedly the origin of creation. And also, when we go through the wisdom traditions of our planet, we discover that wherever we go, whether we're dealing with indigenous tribes people or so-called civilized culture, there's this notion of the fact that we have sound at the core of our very beings. So, for example, if we're dealing with the Anasazi peoples, those people in southwest America, meaning the Hopi, the Tiwa, and the Navajo, they believe that when the Spider Woman sang, she gave birth to all of this. She gave birth to you and me, she gave birth to the bird, to the tree, to the ocean, to the lake, to the mountain, to the antelope, etc., 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 etc. So wherever we go, I mean, that's, you know, if we go into the Judeo-Christian tradition, we know that there's the beginning where God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God breathed into the nostrils of man, and man became a living soul. Or at the beginning of the fourth gospel, we read, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us." Well, I know many years ago I met an Aramaic scholar, Professor Secheli, who had had 10 years' worth of readership of the Vatican Library, you know, the vault underneath St. Peter's, so to speak, underneath Vatican City. And he was one of the world's Aramaic scholars, which is why he was given readership. And one day, during looking at this papyrus, which it was papyrus that he believed came from the Qumran caves, he read in Aramaic, "In the beginning was the sound, and sound was made flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth." So the sound became the word because in Greek, the early Hellenistic writers that translated the Aramaic into Greek with the early Gospels believed that the logos, which is the intelligibility of sound, became the word. And this is what they were writing, and this is what they were speaking. We could be talking about the great Om. It's the same thing. So, the thing that's intrigued me over many, many years is that if sound is at the core of creation, this must mean that we have within us a sound which is the core of our creation. So this thought occurred to me many moons ago when I first started voice coaching, which is effectively 30 years ago. And then, of course, I started asking questions. And, of course, I've discovered that, yeah, each of us has a note. Each of us has a signature note, which is at the very core of our physical geometry. And the interesting thing is that a lot of people in the Western world don't sound that note. So that means they must not be in harmony. Well, so there's a certain logic working out there. And so I started to explore what this meant. And then I realized that through the classical world, particularly through the Greek-Roman thought, and then later through the Italian Renaissance, through the Elizabethan Renaissance, the first Elizabethan Renaissance, because I suppose in many ways this is the second, that there was a belief that we had something called persona, which is the root of the word personality, which is the essence of somebody's being, isn't it? When we say somebody's personality, we're just talking about the whole of them, except that the word persona means per, through, sona, sound. So they worked to find their voices, they worked to find their persona, their signature note, so that they could actually live harmonious lives, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, and therefore they became persona grata, and their servants, or their slaves, were persona non grata. Isn't that fascinating? I find that just amazing. So what I've done, what I've been doing for a long time, is moving around the world and introducing people to their note. So what does this mean? Okay, well, what this means is that the majority of us tend to live here in our heads, because after all, that's the way we've been educated, that's the way we've been conditioned, that's the way that we've been socialized. And of course, we're living in an age today of information, so I know this seems a little bit strange, me doing this suddenly, because I've been doing something else, but actually the majority of people who come to me, they say, "Now look, Stewart, I mean, I've been told that I talk a little bit too fast, and sometimes I lose my words, and, I feel a bit stressed out, so is there anything you can do?" And I say, yeah, there is something I can do. I can introduce you to a fullness of sound which hitherto you're not using. So how about it? Now you can hear that something huge has happened with me just shifting my energy. And so I've moved my energy from here, which is solidly in the sort of cerebral dominance, and I've moved my energy down into this part of my body. And so then we suddenly realize, oh, you mean that when I sound this, when I sound my note, I actually sound the song of my soul, and the song of my soul arises from the seat of my soul, which is my heart. Now, physiologically, how can that be maintained? Okay, well, if you imagine that the whole of my voice is sitting here on a horizontal, because we tend to think in very lateral ways, that we know, for example, if we convert this into a keyboard, that the most important thing about the keyboard is that there's a middle, there's a point of harmony which divides the treble from the bass. So if I relate that to my voice, if I play with my right hand, I go into treble, so you get a lot of that. Now, I mean, the whole of me has just changed, so I feel a bit stressed out. I certainly don't feel the maturity of my years. I feel very young and slightly insecure. Whereas if I go down here, like this, it feels as though I'm really, really pushing my voice down, and actually I think that sounds pretty disturbed, you know, it sounds slightly psychotic. I mean, I suppose my body language would go, you know, we sort of fold in, you know, with somebody coming in, but, you know, it sounds a bit weird if I go here. But if I'm playing with both hands, you get the treble and the bass mixed together, which is this very equitable, very harmonious position. And when we produce this, of course, we begin to feel really relaxed. We feel harmony moving through the whole of our beings. So how do I find that point? Okay, take the horizontal, make it vertical, put it into your spine. Where's the middle? Here. So if you like, you know, rather like the Vitruvian Man of Leonardo da Vinci, we find the point of harmony is right in our center. Our center of gravity is in the base of the spine, in the sacrum. Interesting word, sacrum, because it's related to the same root as the word sacred. So that's where the weight and the gravity of our body is balanced, but actually when we come to use our sound, we lift into this part of our body because it becomes very mobile, it becomes very liquid. So the ancients said, if words arise from the heart, they will enter the heart. If words arise from the tongue alone, they will not pass beyond the ears. So, that's the beginning of what the Temple of Sound Healing, known as the Alchemy of Voice, is all about. It's discovering the first pillar, which is that we each have a note. And when we find that note, we find the core of our being, so we find our soul, we find our power, we find our sovereignty, and life is never the same again. The other pillar is that most of us don't sound our note. So if we go into using sound from a healing transmutational point of view, we can begin to find our note. So it's a whole body of work to do with, literally, the alchemy of voice, using sound to transmute negative into positive, to transmute base metal into gold. So if you like, when we find our note and both pillars are really standing, we find the sovereignty of who we truly are. So all of our base humanity is turned into the liquid gold of our divinity. And life is never the same again. We truly become super beings. And all sorts of stuff happens. You know, we awaken to a level of super coherence, where I believe we begin to transcend from double helix into a triple helix DNA, with the potential for a 12 helix DNA. So we accommodate more atomic fusion. We accommodate more of the radiance of love. And I believe that there are some very remarkable people living on our planet who are already doing this. For example, His Holiness the Dalai Lama radiates love. He radiates such a light that he is always cheerful. Now I'm sure he's a human being, so he knows despair, but as he would say, happiness is a decision, not a condition. So let's use consciousness to transmute from the despair into the higher feeling of hope, or whatever. So what I do is I instrumentalize for people around the world an understanding of when they're going through the shit, of how they can define, this is what I've experienced, this is what I'm experiencing. And I would say that that's the first stage, because most people cannot name what they're feeling, because they haven't been given time to feel what they're feeling and really name it. So for example, the classic answer that I'm given when I'm saying, well, how does it feel if you're not feeling very good is, oh, I feel heavy. Okay, so how does heavy feel? Well, you know, solid. Well, how does solid feel? Well, you know, substantial. So how does substantial feel? Oh, well, thick. So how does thick feel? Well, heavy, you know, really heavy. Okay, so how does heavy feel? Alone. So how does alone feel? Sad. So how does a sad feel? Desperate. So how does desperate feel? Loss. So we get to the truly authentic moment. And then when we have identified that, then we know how to actually go further into what has created that loss. Because the energy is held within our biocomputers, it's held within our chakra. So there's a device that I can use that I've been given to really enter into that space of defining further. And then either they or we sound despair into wherever that holding is. And when it reaches a critical mass, we then, everybody can feel it, we then move it all the way through the body into hope, onto a very, very high frequency, and their whole beings change. Now we're dealing with a vibrational medicine, so obviously it's changing the subtle body into the physical body, and it takes a little bit of time because we're so dense to go right in, because we're using the human voice as a frequency. If we're using ultrasound, which is being used more and more and more and more, it's a higher frequency, so it can penetrate so far, like laser, it can actually burn out tumour. And so more and more and more, sound as a healing modality is being used in conventional medicine. And therefore I would say prophetically, sound is the medicine of the future, except now is the future. Our planet has a unique intelligence of its own, which is part of the consciousness that we are interconnected with, which is the consciousness of all, the all that is. And so we're beginning to recognize that because of choices that we and our forebears have made, that we're not contributing healthily to our planet. So the 8th chakra is beginning to open, the universal heart chakra. So we're beginning to recognize that I must heal me, because if I heal me, I will heal the planet. I must heal the planet, because if I heal the planet, I will heal me. And therefore we move more and more and more through our own note into the supercoherence of the note of our planet, which has shifted frequency over the last 2 years as a result of the Chilean earthquake that took place at the beginning of last year, where the polar axis shifted, and so a few minutes, not degrees, but a few minutes altered, and so therefore time has shifted, so we're moving faster. So our cells are accelerating faster. The difficulty, if we're not careful, is that we lose the earth, and so we get very airborne and very fiery about the passions of our life, as opposed to really being earthed. And as soon as we become earthed, then we live in coherence with the Gaia. So utterly, utterly. You know, there are so many ideas that come to my mind. I remember many years ago being drawn through a whole series of coincidences. Oh yeah, we all know about coincidences, synchronicities, to Taos in New Mexico, which is where I met one of my great teachers. And when I arrived, all I could hear deep within me was this home. But it wasn't it was within me as well as it being without, but it wasn't me making the sound. And I thought, what is this? And through a sequence of events, I realized that it was Taos Mountain that was making this sound. And that Taos Mountain is a powerful electromagnetic transmitter in its own right, within its geology, because the center of the mountain, which is a sacred mountain to the native peoples who live there, called the Tiwa, is a quartz crystal core on an obsidian base. Now that's such a transmitter, that's where our extraterrestrial friends came in to begin the Roswell incident and thousands of other incidents that have taken place in New Mexico. So that was just one experience that comes to my mind of hearing the innate frequency of one aspect of our planet. But look, I mean, Plato heard the movement of the spheres. Sorry, Pythagoras could hear the movement of the spheres. So he could hear, just like a shaman today can go into the Brazilian forest and hear the note of every plant vibrating. The difficulty is that our perceptual mechanisms are very limited because of the noise and the toxicity that is within us and without us, living these metropolitan lives. You see, we only hear between 15 and 25,000 hertz cycles per second, whereas, for example, a whale or a dolphin hears between 5 and 350,000 hertz cycles per second. So the dolphins have that very large sinus here because their eyesight is very poor. So they send off all of these clicks that are sonar into the ocean around them, which is why they can swim so fast but never bang into a rock, because the rock sends off an echolocation, do you see? So the sound goes and responds just as you can feel now with my sound, that it's moving into your body. You feel it in your body and it's springing off your body. And I guess that if we begin to produce the same sound together, that's when we feel we're in rapport, when we're in harmony. It's a fascinating question, really, really fascinating. If we go back 400 years ago, the Elizabethans said that all speech was decorated silence. Now that, for me, explodes me internally. It just quickens me, it stirs me. So you mean noise has got in the way? The noise within and the noise without, the noise in the machines and the noise of our own toxicity has got in the way of we producing something which is so innate, which is so instinctive, which is so organic, which is so atavistic, and that as soon as we release ourselves of the noise, we return to that that is truly innate. For example, this was a story told me many, many years ago, that just one particular African tribe, that the Dagara in Burkina Faso, that when a woman is about to give birth to her babe, her sisters take her into the wild, away from community, and they wait and they sit and they listen until they hear the note of the child. And then they sing the note of the child. And the woman stirs. The child stirs within. So they take her back into the community, and when she's about to come forth with child, bring forth child, they come and they sing the note of the child. So the child is welcomed into the world with its own vibration, which is of the earth. And then as the child grows into, what's the next rite of passage? Gaining namehood, something like that, gaining namehood. The community come and sing. And then as the child grows into pubescence, presumably, the community come and sing the note of the child. So there's a continual resonance, reinforcement of the identity in sound of that individual. And then as they grow, marriage, community comes, sings both notes. As they grow, maybe it's then death, the community comes and sings. And if somebody within the tribe has committed a misdemeanor, whether they've stolen, they've maimed, they've raped, they've murdered, they've killed, they're put in the centre of the circle, and the tribe sings their note. So they are reminded of who they truly are, not what they've become. So it's innate within us, which is why we all speak stories rather, and sing songs. But when was the last time that you and your girlfriends were able to sit down, what we used to call the sewing circle or the knitting circle, and talk, and unbridle your heart, and sing songs? Thank God, I'm sure you have this experience, thank God we sang when we were children, because it was so much part of our education. Today, is it so much? And we were encouraged, because this was before the real use of telecommunication technology, that, when I was born, we didn't have a TV. So we listened to the wireless. So therefore we read stories to one another. But today the pictures have taken over, so the visual is taking over, and therefore, again, we're getting noisy within here, as opposed to return to the vital organic substance of our own note, and that brims forth from that fountain spring, which is our essential creativity. So therefore again, you see, we come back to the point that sound is at the core of creation. You know, I've trained actors for many, many, many years, and the wonderful thing about actors is that they work so hard to be utterly true, and sometimes they achieve it and sometimes they don't. But majority actors are actually working in really unnatural situations, appearing to be really natural. You know, if you, for example, take the conventional film set or TV, you know, we're playing a scene. We've only just met. What we can see are 4 cameras, 3 technicians each camera, the director, the continuity people, the makeup, the sparks. You know, there are 70 people out there, but we're just playing this really, really intimate scene. But the viewer only sees this. I think it's remarkable. So, of course, they learn to really find what that truth is. So yeah, I mean, part of my job as a voice director, as a voice coach, was just allowing people to feel what is their ultimate truth. So if I said, for example, to you, come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove, it means one thing that you'll relate to. But if I then say, come live with me and be my love, and we will all the pleasures prove, it means something completely different. For me, one is uncentered and one is centered in truth. So yeah, so Stephen has an amazing voice and loves words and is a wordsmith. And of course within words is sound, and sound is a dimension of the meaning. I would suggest to anybody, try this experiment, that when you're watching TV, whether it's news or whatever, if you feel jarred by the sound, if there's a reckoning on that level, close your eyes and actually you will not be able to make sense of what they're saying. If you open your eyes, your intelligence will make sense. But as soon as you actually hear somebody like Stephen, you want to watch and you want to listen, because suddenly they resonate something completely different. I mean, there are many, many voices I could comment on who I think are not really using the ultimate. But I wouldn't mention their names because it would go against my philosophy of don't criticize, otherwise you're judging. But if they came to me as a client, I would automatically step in with a degree of discernment and say, well, why don't we just try doing this?
So that, you know, they remove from the tight jaw, highly arched tongue, which we're hearing more and more and more in this particular city, almost as though we're borrowing, you know, what we hear with our friends on the northeastern seaboard, you know, who are beginning to become really, really, really nasal. Which is not the way that I used to hear New York City 40 years ago. You know, I have an agent who lives there,
and she talks like that. Darling, you will meet me at the St. Pierre, you know. So there's something about the fact that here we are moving over unremitting concrete and gradually getting tenser and more tense. And so therefore, we're making all sorts of sounds. So, yeah, there are some sounds we want to listen to, and there are some sounds we don't.